Good morning, everyone. We are up to Chafez Amid Beis 22b. We are by the first set of two dots. So on this Amud, on this folio, there's the two dots. The first set. There's another set. There's a second set, and then there's Mishnah. So we're on the first set, where it says that when the shade is more than the sun, it will be kosher. Now, we did explain that although this Mishnah came to teach us that that when the sun is more, it's going to be kosher. It's not a question that this is the second time we're repeating. It's not repetitive, meaning we already mentioned that way back when, in the beginning of the whole Masechta, beginning of the tractate, it said that was one of the conditions, that if the sun is more than the shade, then it's going to be possible. Over here we're saying that the shade is more than the sun, it's going to be kosher. It's only kosher if the shade is more than the sun. Now the Gemara is going to ask that question. Now, why isn't it repetitive? So, ha'kia dadi psula. But we'll do some Talmudic logic that if our Mishnah that says that the shade is more than the sun, it's going to be kosher. But what happens when they're equal? Then it's going to be kosher, because our Mishnah specifically states you have to have more shade. But when it's equal, it's going to be not good.
Tie goes to the runner.
The tie goes to the runner. There you go. Now, but we learned in the first parak, meaning the first Mishnah of the entire Masechta, that when the sun is more than the shade, then it's going to be invalid. Now let's apply the Talmudic logic again. Hakia dadi, but when it's equal, sheira. But when it's equal, it's going to be kosher. So now we have a bit of a contradiction. In our Mishnah, it seems to point to the fact that when it's equal, the same amount of shade and sun, it's invalid. In the first Mishnah of the Masechta, it seems to point to that if it's equal, then it's going to be our Mishnah is going to say that it's kosher. In the beginning, the first Mishnah looks like it's going to be puzzle. Now let me repeat that one more time. Our Mishnah looks like it's going to be puzzle. The first Mishnah looks like it's going to be kosher. If it's equal, therefore it's a contradiction. So like kasha, kan milamala, kan milamata. No, that's not. It's not a problem. This is what it means to say is that when our Mishnah states that when it's that when the shade is more than the sun is kosher, but when it's equal, it's going to be puzzle. That's talking about on top. That when it's equal to the shade on top, that means that the light is streaming in. The light always gets wider. So therefore, if it's equal on top, it means on the bottom it's going to be more. That's why it's invalid. The first Mishnah is talking about when it's on the floor. When on the floor you have the same amount of shade, and when you have the same amount of shade and sun, then that's really okay. Just when it's on top, it's equal. Then on bottom you can get more sun. Like Amar Papa, like Rav Papa says, when it's like a zuz on top, it's like a istra, which is a larger size coin on bottom. Is that right? When you have a light source, it always spreads out from the top. Therefore, if it's equal on top, you got a problem because it can be more sun on bottom. So therefore, that's our Mishnah saying that it's puzzle. And the first Mishnah is talking about when it's equal on bottom, then it will be kosher. Okay, good morning. We are up to Chaf Beis Amid Beis, up to 22b, and we're up 4 lines above the Mishnah. Okay, we go on to the Mishnah stated Mu'uba Kmin Bayis. When you have the schach is thick like a house. Tan Rabbanan, Mu'uba Kmin Bayis, Af Bishin HaChavim Nira Mitaycha Ksheira. Even though you cannot see the stars through the schach, it's still going to be valid. Ein Koichi Chama Nira Mitachas Beis. Now, what happens? Ein Koichi Chama Nira Mitaycha. What happens when we can't see the sun of the star of the sun, right? Our sun, which is a star, but you can't see the sun when it's so thick that you can't even see the sun at all. Bishamai says that it's going to be. Bishamai says it's invalid, but Basil said it is valid. Okay, now we're up to the Mishnah. If you create a sukkah on top of a wagon, or on a boat, it's going to be valid. The oil will be empty. And not only that, you're able to ascend and climb into it on Shabbos and Shabbos and Yom Tov. But if you make it in a house, you make a tree house with schach, or on top of an animal, in this case it's a camel, it will be valid. However, you cannot ascend, you cannot climb into it on Yom Tov. Now, the reason I can't climb onto Yom Tov is that it's forbidden to climb a tree on Yom Tov. Therefore, it's true you have a good sukkah, it's inaccessible on Yom Tov. And the same thing with an animal. They both come from the same idea. They might crack a branch. Now, shtayim be'ilan achas adam. Now, what if you have a sukkah that two of the walls are being supported by the tree, and one is somehow the third wall. The support is built by you. Shtayim b'nei adam achas be'ilan. Or two of the walls are supported by you, meaning you created some type of foundation, and the third wall is based on the tree. Still, nothing changed. It's kosher. It's valid, but still you can't go on Yom Tov because it's still partially supported by the tree. If three of them are supported by it was created as a support system by you, but only achas bilan, then and only one's on the tree. On that point, it's valid as the other ones are. But the difference is that over here in this case, you're able to climb up on Yom Tov. This is the rule. That if you remove, the rule is that if you would remove the tree and the sukkah is still valid, then it's valid the oilei Yom Tov. In that case, you could climb on Yom Tov. Therefore, the case in the Mishnah that there's three walls and only the fourth wall is supported by a tree. At that point, it's not a problem because if you remove the tree, who cares? You're still left with three walls, and three walls is a valid sukkah. Therefore, I could climb onto it on Yom Tov. I can utilize it on it. Okay, that is the Mishnah. So we learned in the Mishnah that it's permitted to have a sukkah on a boat and on top of a wagon, and the same with the tree and an animal. But the difference is, the tree and animal you can't climb, you can't utilize it on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Now ask Gemara, Mana Masnisin, who is the one who's the author of the Mishnah, or at least of the halacha of that one is permitted to have a sukkah on the ship? Rabbi Kiva, it's Rabbi Kiva says Gemara. The Tanya, because we learned. If we create a sukkah on the top of a boat, Rabbi Kiva machshir. Rabbi Gamliel says it's invalid. Rabbi Kiva said it's valid. So we see it's valid. Rabbi Kiva is one who holds that it's valid to have a sukkah on a boat, and that he is the author. He's the one who stated in our Mishnah the halacha that one could have a sukkah on a boat. We are on Chaf Gimel Aleph. We're on 23a, and we are 3 lines from the start of the Gemara, about 5 lines from the top of the daf. Now, Maisa B'Ram Gamliel, Rabbi Kiva. Now, to bring out this point of this argument between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Gamliel, if one could have a sukkah on a boat. Now, there's a story that they were both Ba'in B'Sfina. They were traveling on a boat. Amad Rabbi Kiva Isa Sukkah, B'Reish Sfina. Rabbi Kiva stood up and he built himself a sukkah on the boat. The next morning, Nishba Ruach Ve'akarta. Then the wind blew, and obviously on a boat, the wind on the high seas is a lot stronger than on land, and it blew over the sukkah. Amalei Gamliel Akiva Hechen Sukkascha. So Gamliel sort of made fun of him a little bit. It's like, no, where's your sukkah? Meaning there was no. I hold this invalid anyway, so you shouldn't have bothered building it. And now you don't have a sukkah anyway, and you don't have a sukkah anyway. You should have listened to me and not bothered building it. And I'm assuming, and you're patur, you're traveling on a boat. According to Rabbi Gamliel, you can't have a sukkah, so you're in a position where you can't have a sukkah, so you're patur, and that's that. It's nothing you do about it. Now, or it could have been it was just on a chalamayit, and you get away with it. Well, I don't know how you sleep because it was overnight, obviously, because the next morning they woke up and it was gone. But you don't have to eat necessarily. And name is Zionist. Okay. Now Amar Abaya. So Abai says the Kuli Alma Heicha de Ina Yichil LaAmay Brach Mitsuya de Abasha Leiklumhi. Abaya explains the story that if your sukkah is so fragile that it cannot even withstand a normal wind on dry land, meaning it's an everyday wind, then it's not a good sukkah. A sukkah has to be at least able to withstand the normal winds that we have on land. And if it's able to withstand the non-normal winds, meaning high-powered winds, everyone agrees that it's going to be kosher. So where are they arguing? The machlekes between Rabbi Kiva and Gamliel is when you build a structure that can withstand the slight winds, but it cannot withstand the high-powered winds, the non-normal winds. Rabbi Gamliel holds that a sukkah, he holds like Rabbi Yehuda in the beginning of the Masechta, that a sukkah has to be a permanent dwelling. Now, if it's a permanent dwelling, it has to be able to withstand strong winds. So Rabbi Gamliel held that if it cannot withstand the winds on the boat, then it's not going to be a good valid sukkah anyway, and that's what happened. And in the next morning when they wake up, the winds of the sea blew it down. So Rabbi Gamliel held, and therefore no sukkah is valid it's very hard to build a sukkah on a boat that will actually stand. Rabbi Kiva savar sukkah diras. Arai be'inan. Rabbi Kiva held that a sukkah is temporary. Since it's able to at least withstand a normal wind on the land, so on a boat, if you build, even though it's true that chances are when you build a sukkah on a boat, it'll get blown down, that doesn't mean that it's an invalid sukkah to begin with. Because if this structure was on land, it would last. There would be no problem. Just on the sea, it's much stronger wind. So it doesn't. So it's even though it's true that on the boat it might not last, but still it's a valid structure because it's able to withstand wind of the land. And that was machlekes between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Gamliel. Okay, any questions? All right. Oyel Gabi Gamo. So we continue by the two dots on Chaf Gimel Lamed Aleph on 23a, or if you build a sukkah on top of a camel. Now, Mastis money again. The Gemara asks, who is the author of the halacha that says that it's permitted to build a sukkah on top of an animal? Rabbi Meir, it's Rabbi Meir. The Tanya, because we learned to Isis Kosel Gabi Behemer Meir Mach review the Paisel. Simple. You have an open brisa that says, or Meir is the one who said it's valid to build a sukkah on top of an animal. And how do you build a sukkah on top of an animal? If you think about it,
Carefully.
That's for sure. But it has to be very wide, right? 7 tefachim is pretty wide to start building on top of a camel. So, unless maybe it's an elephant, but even then it's going to be hard. And we'll talk about an elephant soon. But so Rashi explains that you have two animals standing side by side. You hitch them to a post, make sure they don't move. You put a board over them, then you start building up, because at that point it's wide enough to be a kosher sukkah. So in case if anyone wants to start building on top of a horse, right? John, have you ever got to the stables and you want to have a sukkah on sukkah, so you take 2 horses and start building a sukkah. Okay, now my time is Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason for Rabbi Yehuda? Why does Yehuda hold that it's invalid to build a sukkah on top of an animal? So Amakra, Chag HaSukkah is Tasel Chashivas Yamim. The Torah states that the festival of Sukkot you should create for you. John wrote, I'm hoping to find an elephant. Chag HaSukkah is Tasel Shivas Yamim. The Torah wrote that you should have a festival of Sukkot for 7 days. Meaning, when you create the Sukkah, it's for 7 days. Sukkah haroyu l'shiva shem. It has to be a Sukkah haroyu l'shiva. It has to be worthy to withstand 7 days. Shema Sukkah shmei Sukkah. If it's able to stand for 7 days, it's called a Sukkah. Sukkah she'ein royu l'shiva lo shmei Sukkah. And a Sukkah that is not going to last the entire Yom Tiv. Not last. My bad. That's not what I mean to say. What I mean to say is that it has to be a sukkah which you could use for 7 days. But a sukkah which you cannot use for 7 days is not called a sukkah. Now, am I able to use a sukkah on an animal for 7 days? The answer is no, because the Mishnah clearly stated that you can't use it on Yom Tov. So therefore, you can't use it for 7 days. The max you're going to use it for is about 5 days, if there's Chol Hamoed. Therefore, it's an invalid sukkah according to Rabbi Yehuda, because the Torah teaches us specifically that it has to be a sukkah that could be utilized all 7. And since the rabbis decreed that you can't climb on top of an animal, it's not going to work. That's Rabbi Yehuda. Rameir, so what does Rameir do? Rameir holds it's valid, but this is a perfectly good drasha. We learn from the pasuk that it has to be able to be used for 7 days. So Hanami b'daraisa michse chazia. So Rameir says, wait a minute, you're bringing a proof from the Torah. You have to utilize it for 7 days. Yeah, but according to the Torah, you could use it for 7 days. It's only a rabbinic decree that you can't climb on top of an animal. So biblically, it's fine. So therefore, Rabban with the Gazri bus. The rabbis that made the Gezerah. So it's fine. It works out beautifully. The Torah writes you have to have a sukkah that you could use for 7 days. And according to the Torah, I could use a sukkah for 7 days on top of an animal. Therefore, it's valid. Happens to be the rabbis forbade it, but it's not taking away from the fact that the Torah tells me I could use it for 7 days. According to the Torah, I could use it for 7 days. That is Rameir's opinion. Okay. Now, now we're going to talk about what if I end up utilizing an animal as one of the walls. Now, if I go ahead and I use an animal as one of the sukkah walls, meaning I built my structure and I only have 2 walls, I leave my horse, I hitch her or him to the sukkah, and there is my 3rd wall. Now, Rameir Paisel, Rameir says it's invalid. Rabbi Yehuda Machshir, and in this case they swap. In this case, Rameir says that it's invalid. Yehuda says that it's valid. So according to Rameir, I could build a sukkah on top of an animal, but I can't use it as a wall. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, I cannot. It's invalid to use a sukkah on top of an animal, but I am able to use it as a wall. Okay. Now why? Rameir held kol davar sheish by ruach chaim in oisin oislei doifin l'sukkah. That anything that is living, I cannot go ahead and use it as a wall for my sukkah, and I cannot use it as a post for my eruv of my alley. And we spoke about this. This was when they were traveling to Yerushalayim on 3 times a year to the Oile Regel. They needed water and they had to draw from wells in the desert. So they made those 4 posts at the edge, the 4 simple posts at each corner, and that they consider they use that as an area for the emergency situation. So I can't use an animal for that as a wall. Nor can I have it be nor will it be used as a cover for a casket or for a grave, which has a special halacha to it. Whatever it is, it's not going to work for an animal. And because of Yosef Glili, you also cannot write on a live animal a get for women. You have a question?
So Rabbi Yehuda holds it as a permanent.
Rabbi Yehuda holds that one. That's a good question. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda does hold that you need a permanent dwelling. So you're asking is that it's not a permanent dwelling if there's one wall there.
Then with an animal, the wall is permanent.
What?
But he's accepting an animal
As a wall, yeah.
Right.
No, I understand. I understand. So Jules asking good questions. That according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that a sukkah has to be permanent, and I don't think we'll ask this question. It does. Okay, we'll see. He's asking that according to Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that it has to be a permanent structure. How can an animal be considered a permanent structure? Unless you want to say the structure is sound, because you do have 3 walls or 2 walls. It's just an animal blocking. Meaning, for example, maybe you could have like a very strong structure with an open side, and you just need it to block it to maybe have a halachic wall. I wonder, maybe that's an answer. I don't see Taisus asking it.
If there are already 3 walls,
It wouldn't be. Now also, also, when it said building a sukkah on an animal, we don't say according to Rabbi Yehuda the reason is because it's not a permanent structure. I can't imagine having a permanent structure on top of an animal.
Right.
He says a different reason because you can't climb onto it on Yom Tov. So it could be a different Rabbi Yehuda. I don't think it is. I wonder if it's good question. I'll look into it. Okay. So we said that you can't use it for various. You can't use a live animal for a sukkah. You can't use it for a lechi. You can't use it for a covering. And according to Rabbi Yossi, you also can't write a get on it. And the Gemara is going to talk later on why you can't write a get on it. Now, my time is Rameir. What's the reason Rameir holds that one that's invalid? So Baya Omer. So we have two answers why Rameir holds that's invalid to use an animal as a wall. Now we did say because it's living, but what's the reason for that? Very nice. That just clarifies what is included in this ban of using. But why is it so? So Abaya, we're gonna have Abaya and Reb Zera. Abaya Omer Shematamus, that Abaya held that it might die, and if it dies, and if the animal dies in Yom Tov and it falls, then you lose your wall. And you can't really move it because it's Yom Tov, and you can't replace it. So now over Yom Tov, you're not gonna have a sukkah. So you're afraid it's gonna die, and you're not end up having a sukkah over Yom Tov. Reb Zera held that maybe it might run off, and then again, both have the same idea that you're gonna be left without a sukkah. One just thinks it's gonna die, one says it's gonna run off. Now, so therefore, now we're gonna go through a case that where the argument will come up. The pill kosher, if you have a tied up elephant, pligi. No one's going to argue why. Because if the elephant dies, who cares? Even if it collapsed, even if it collapsed, still an elephant is higher than 10 tefachim. So you have a dead elephant, okay, but still you have a wall. So we're talking about a case that you have a elephant that's not that's not tied up. The one that says it might die, we don't care, because as we said, that if it dies, you still have a valid wall. But now that it's untied, the man that holds, and it might run away, hashinan. That's where we're worried about. It might run away, and therefore you're going to be left without a wall. Now, according to Abaya that holds that it might die, at the end of the day, you shouldn't be afraid that it runs away, and let's be a little practical here. If you have an elephant or an animal not tied up, it might run away, and then you'll be left without a wall. So, Ella, the pilsha any kosher kli amloi pligi. If it's an elephant that's not attached and it's not held down, everyone's going to hold that's invalid because it might run away. Pligi, the behema kashura, if it's tied up. The Mandamar says that it might die. In that case, we are going to be concerned. But however, the one that said that it might run away, it's not a problem because it is tied up. Now, and the one that holds that it might run away, again, let's be practical. It might die. And we're not talking about an elephant, because we said if an elephant dies, then it's not a problem. So we're not talking about an elephant, obviously. But might be a smelly sukkah. That's true. Neil asks, were elephants plentiful in Babylon? I don't know. In Babel, they have elephants? Maybe.
Well, maybe back then the environment was different. I mean, nowadays we think it was being a more arid place, but back then, no.
I'm assuming. I don't know. Don't you think the stories of the Persian armies that were marching, they didn't come on elephants?
That's true.
And if elephants were, everyone had them. They were modern day tanks. They were war machines. So, all right.
True.
Now let's be practical. So Reb Zera that said that it might run away, it might die. Again, this is not. They're not really. The reasons of dying or running away are not built on any specific source. It's just being practical. So if you're trying to be practical, let's be practical. Let's be practical. You have to be practical. And if you're not going to think it's run away or think it's not going to die, it's not being practical. So Misa leishchicha. So over here, so Reb Zera was holding that according to Reb Meir, that we're not worried about death. Misa leishchicha. So therefore, that's his answer. So Reb Zera didn't worry about dying because Reb Meir's shita, Reb Meir's opinion across Shas, across Talmud is that we're not choshish, we're not concerned that something might die. And in the next Talmud, we're going to talk about exactly how that gets, and we'll talk about it. And in halacha, and that applies to halacha. Do we have to worry about someone's going to die or not? We'll see in a minute. Now, Well, very nice using an elephant or a cow or a camel. At the end of the day, they have feet, and there's open spaces on bottom of the animal that's not going to give you 10 tefachim. So the avilei b'hoitz of a dafna. So you fill up that area with palm branches or type of a bay leaf. So that's not a problem. And so now you're afraid that's going to die, but it might crouch, it might lay down, go to sleep, and there you lose your wall. The answer is the mesicha ba'ashli mil'el. That what you did was you tied it up and you hung it from upside down. Therefore, it's not a problem. And the one that holds that it might die, let's have a simple answer. That if you tie it up and you do this, then whether it's alive or dead, it's still going to be hanging, right? So if you're hanging it up, who cares if it dies? It's a carcass hanging. So as you say, won't be a very pleasant sukkah to be living in, but still it will be a sukkah. So the answer is like this: that let's say even if it's tied up and it's hanging upside down, at times the animal is low enough, it's small enough that I'm utilizing lavud. That I tied it up, I'm hanging it, and it's hanging, and it's hitting the ground up, and it's only 7 plus a little bit tefachim. So now I'm going to use lavud to fill up the gap to the schach for my 10 tefach top wall. And that we turn to the top of Taf Gimel Beis 23b. Yikim the ma'isa, but when it dies, kiyutza v'lo yadaita. Happens is that when it dies, it's going to end up losing moisture, and it's going to shrink a little bit, and it's going to go below 7 tefachim. I'm going to lose my level. So when we say that we're afraid that it's going to die, we're not afraid that it's going to collapse necessarily and totally destroy my sukkah. We're afraid that it's going to remain where it is, but since it died, it's going to start shriveling up, and therefore it's going to shrivel up enough that I no longer have my 7 tefachim high wall. If I don't have my 7 tefachim high wall, I don't have my level, I got an invalid sukkah.
It's really a raw deal to be an elephant. The Talmud.
Nah, not the elephant. Yeah, an animal. All right. Yeah. Okay. So me Amar Abaya Rameir Chayish Lamisa. We feel like Chayish. Is that really true? That according to Abaya, hold on. Yeah. So Abaya is not refer. Abaya is the one that said that it might die, and it must be that according to Rameir. If the argument between Rameir and Rabbi Yehuda is that might die, it must be Rameir is the one who, according to Abaya, Rameir holds that we are concerned about an animal dying, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that we're not concerned, not an animal across the board. That Rameir in the entire in all Gemaras, does he worry about death and halacha? Halacha worry about death. So according to Abaya, Rameir holds that we are, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that we don't. But we learned in the following verse: Bas Yisrael shenasa l'kain, a Bas Yisrael, a daughter of a woman who's not a kain, right? So a woman who comes from a family of an Israelites, she marries a priest, a kain. And her husband goes off on a trip to across the seas. Now, back in the day, it would be months and perhaps years before you hear anything about the guy. He might come back, be a report that he's dead. It will take years to find out anything if he actually died. Now, during that time, we let the wife eat truma. And since she's not a daughter of a priest, she comes from a Yisrael. She's only allowed to eat as long, and I'm assuming she has no children. She's only allowed to eat as long as she's married. Now, if her husband divorces her or dies, then she goes back to her father's house and she's no longer allowed to eat truma. Now, in this case, that her husband went off across the seas and is gone for many years, we let her continue eating truma and meiser because there's no reason for us to assume that he died. That is what we're saying here. Ramin Allah. And we asked on this brisa, now what happens if he goes across the sea and he gives her a get? Now the reason why he gives her a get is that in case he dies suddenly in a different city, and this is a case that she has no children, because otherwise she would be able to continue to eat truma. I think if she has any children, she's able to eat truma based on the children. But that since she had no children, he's traveling across the seas. He doesn't know what his future is going to be. It's harsh travel. It's very harsh traveling. And therefore, she's afraid he's going to die. If he dies, she's going to fall to Yibum to his brother. and that's just a painful process. Therefore, in order to mitigate that, he wrote her again, said, here's a get, and it'll be valid an hour before I die. Now, if he sends such a get, then we say that she's not allowed to eat truma, because we're always assuming that she's going to die. So we have two brises that are contradicting each other. One seems to say she could eat truma, and we're not concerned that he died. And another one is saying that if you give a get, and you write in the get, and when you give it, this is you get an hour before I die, we're going to assume he is going to die, and we're assuming that this is the hour, and therefore, it's not permitted. So now we have Abaya, and Abaya said on that as an answer to this contradicting brisas, like Asha, it's not a question. Harameir, V'loy chayish lemisa. The first is Rameir that does not suspect for death. Rabbi Yehuda, the chayish lemisa, and this is Rabbi Yehuda that does suspect for death. Now, right then and there, we have our question. That according to Abaya, he just wrote, Rameir holds that we don't suspect that someone's going to die in halacha. And Rameir by us, in the case of the animal, he wrote, Abaya held that we do suspect that it's going to die. So right there's our contradiction. But we didn't finish our question. Let's continue. The Tanya, because we learned, now how do we know that how did Abaya know that Rameir is the one that holds that we don't suspect for death, and Rabbi Huda holds it too? The time we learned, that someone buys wine from the kusim, Amar Shnei Lugin Shani Asala Hafish Harehin Shuma. So back then, when they used to buy wine from the kusim, now if you buy wine from if you buy wine from an Ama'aret, someone who is not a farmer who back then wasn't well learned, then you have to. There was something called, we assume that maybe didn't take off Meiser, Trumas to Meiser, so you have to take it off. Now, however, if you buy wine from the kusim, the Kusites, then even though this was before the rabbinic decree, there was one point, Rashi explains, at one point the rabbi said that just like you're not allowed to buy wine, you drink wine of a non-Jew because you're afraid of idol worship, in this case, they also extend that to the Kusites. Now, and this was before that period, but one thing was for sure, the Kusites for sure, we assumed, did not take off any Trumas Samaisris, therefore you had to take off Trumas Samaisris, and it was as if you just took grapes from the vineyard without taking off Trumas Samaisris. So if I bought wine from a Kusite, you have to take off Trumas Samaisris. And now, it's before Shabbos, it's already Shabbos, it's already the night of Shabbos, and you're not allowed to really take off Trumas Samaisris on Shabbos. So what do? So you say is, the Tanya you say the 2 out of 100 lugin that I will be mafresh is for truma. So you're sort of taking off truma not right now. You're taking off truma for the future. Asara meiser rishon, and then you take 10 of the 100 is going to be for meiser rishon. Meiser is a 10th, right? So therefore it's a 10th. Tisha meiser sheni, and then you're down to 90 because you took off 10, and therefore. Truth is really down to 88, but whatever. You take 10 out of 90, which is 9, another 10, which is 9 for Meiser Sheni. Umechal, and it's chal, it works, and you're able to go ahead and drink it. You're able to drink it right away. Divrei Rameir. So Rameir says, I'm allowed to take off truma in advance before I actually do it. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to separate. Therefore, Friday night I say, I'm drinking wine and I will take off truma. So make sure you don't drink all of it because you got to leave over to take off Saturday night. Because if you don't take it off and you drink all of it retroactively, you just drink wine that was that you did not take off the proper amount of Trumas Samaisros. Okay. Now, but Rameir does not suspect that you're gonna. Now, Rameir says you're able to go and drink it, and Rameir does not suspect that you might spill. Someone might drink. He's not suspecting that any calamity will take place, that you're going to lose it. Meaning maybe your son will go drink all of it by mistake. There's so many what ifs that might take place that come Saturday night, you're not left with any wine to actually separate it, and it retroactively will be that you drank Truma and Meiser Sheni, but Rameir doesn't suspect. Rabbi Yehuda, we're on the top of Chavdal and Amal, from the top of 24a. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yisrael, Rabbi Shimon, Asrin? Question mark. That's our question. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yisrael, Rabbi Shimon does prove that it's going to be Asr. So right now we have Rameir, who does not suspect, according to Abaya. So let's go through this again. Rameir, according to Abaya, Rameir in our I'm just gonna go back through it again because it's a lot of steps here. So we said, are you able to go ahead and create and build an animal as a wall and use an animal as a wall? Rameir said you're not allowed to. It's invalid. Abaye said the reason is because it might die. So we see from here, Rameir suspects in halacha that something might take place, might die, that an animal might die. Okay, on that we ask, but we have a brisa that according to Abaye, is that really true that Rameir holds that we suspect for death? But we have a brisa that says that a wife of a kohen is able to eat truma even though he's not around, he went overseas. And then we had a contradiction that said that the get, that if someone gives a get, and it says this is a get, an hour before I die, then the woman cannot eat trumas and ma'asos. So we had a contradiction. On that, Abaye says, not a question. This is Rameir, and Rameir holds that we're not chayshish. And right there's our question. Rameir, we see from here, according to Abaye, Rameir does not suspect death in halacha, even though by the case of an animal, he does suspect for death in halacha. And then how did Abaye know that Rameir holds that we don't suspect the death? Because we had the case of the wine. In the case of the wine, you're able to take off wine. You're able to say, I will take off wine, and then when I take it off, and we don't worry that there'll be a calamity take place, that you'll lose your wine, it'll end up being retroactively that you never took off trumas and ma'asos. So the point is that we see from the wine, the Rameir does not suspect that something drastic will take place. And therefore, Abaye said, we see from that he is the one that holds that a daughter of a kohen is able to go ahead and eat trumas and ma'asos. But at the end of the day, we're still left with a problem. According to Abaye, in our Mishnah, he does worry that an animal will die. And in the case of the wine, in the case of the woman with the husband going across the seas, he does not worry about a calamity. But in the case of the animal, he does worry about a problem. So that's our question. That's our contradiction on Abaye. Now we're going to go to the answer on the top of Chavdal and Aleph, the last word on the line, on the first line. We're going to switch it around. Rameir chayish lemisa, Yehuda loy chayish lemisa. Let's flip it around. By the case of the get, it's that, and that's where the real question came from, that Rameir is the one who does suspect for death. So Rameir is the one that says that if a husband gives a wife a get and it says this is a get an hour before a priest gives a get to his wife and says this is a get an hour before I die, and then he disappears to the high seas, then we suspect that he might be dying, and this is the hour that he might be dead. This is the hour before death, and therefore she cannot eat trumas and ma'asos. Rabbi Yehuda is the one who holds that we don't suspect for it. The Tanya could be learned, and this is the proof. From the Sukkah, Rameir Paisel, Rabbi Yehuda Machshir. Now, the problem is though, that's very nice, but Kasher is Rameir ad Rameir. What's with the wine? We have a brisa that tells us that Rameir suspects. Rameir. Yeah. Well, so we see that Rameir does suspect that the husband might die or the animal might die. But what's with the wine? In the case of the wine, he does not suspect that you might spill the glass of all. You might break the barrel of the wine. We don't suspect that it might spill. We don't suspect that someone's going to steal it. We don't suspect that a kid's going to drink all of it. We don't suspect for any calamity, and therefore you could take off trumas and ma'asos before you actually you could say it before you actually physically remove the wine. So it's a big contradiction. One place we suspect for death, and the other place we don't suspect for something to take place, and we're equating the death with the spilling of the wine, meaning we're just worried something might happen. So Malach Rameir. There's a huge difference. Don't compare wine to death. Death, you have no control over. It could just happen, unfortunately, just take place. However, when it comes to breaking of the bottle, put it in a safe, take the whatever wine you plan on separating, put it into a safe, lock it, and that's it. I mean, nothing should take place with it. There's nothing to worry about. And that's his answer. Now, Kasher ad Rabbi Yehuda. But we do have a question from Yehuda on Rabbi Yehuda. Again, Rabbi Yehuda holds by the Sukkah. We don't worry that the animal is going to die. And you could use an animal as a wall. But by the case of the wine, we're afraid that you're going to break the cup and you're going to lose all the wine, and you're not going to be able to have any wine to remove for truma. And retroactive will be that you drank truma. So time Rabbi Yehuda lav mishum dechayish lebikiyas hanoi. The reason for Rabbi Yehuda is not because we're afraid that something might happen, i.e., breaking of the barrel. Ela mishum delesle breira. He doesn't hold the breira. Now, breira means is that breira is a very hard concept in Talmud. And what breira means, I'll try to explain it, is that in the future, we could decide in the future for the past. Meaning, just take the example of the wine. When you actually end up going ahead and pouring the wine, and you're going to say, I am separating wine for a truma, and you didn't physically separate because Shabbos is not allowed to. When it comes to Shabbos and I actually do separate it, we're willing to say that the question is, could we say that this that I'm separating, the wine that I'm actually physically separating Saturday night, could catch onto my words that he said Friday night? Am I able to connect the two? So Rabbi Yehuda holds Leslie Breira. There's no such thing as Breira. There's no choosing. You can't say, we're not going to let you say, in halacha, conceptually, it doesn't work, that whatever I'm doing in Saturday night is actually going to latch onto the words that I said Friday night. I can't connect the two. Therefore, when it comes Saturday night and I'm actually separating the wine, you're just separating random wine. So, and you're not going to be able to say that this is the wine that I was referring to when it came to Friday night. According to Meir, when I'm separating something, you got to do it right away in order to connect to the words that I'm saying. I hope that explained it. If anyone wants to speak up and explain it better, I'm more than happy. No, I'm serious. I mean, what does Arshkel say for Breira? Like what words did he say? The last day Breira.
At this point, it's discussed Breira
All right.
earlier.
Okay. Just all right. V'lo chayish Rabbi Yehuda lebekias night. Now, is that really true? That Rabbi Yehuda does not suspect that the barrel might break, but mitani seifa, we look in the seifa. Amrulei Rameri at the moide shem yivka hanoit. Now, at the end of this brayta, which in the beginning we didn't mention by the case of the wine, but there's a continuation to it, and we're going to go through it right now. Amrulei Rameri at the moide shem yivka hanoit v'nim sezeh shayis tavalim lemafreya. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi, and Rabbi Shimon, who all say that you cannot separate Truma Friday night by just verbally and then physically separate it Saturday night. It doesn't work. They turn to Rabbi Meir, says that it does, and they said to him, do you not agree that it's going to break? So it looks like the actual concern was not Breira. It wasn't if he was able to catch the physical separating, able to catch on his verbal separating. Rather, it's because he really was afraid that it was going to break. And that brings us back to the original question. It's a contradiction of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is not worried about death by the animal, by the sukkah. So why is he worried about death or a calamity taking place when it came to the wine? So we see that Rabbi Yehuda is worried about breaking. This is what Yehuda was saying to me. My opinion, there's nothing to talk about. There's no way for me to physically separate Saturday night in order to connect to my words Friday night. However, let me find the place. But according to you, it's yesh breira. You hold there is breira. It's true. You must hold that you're able to connect it. But okay, fine. So halachically, it could take place. At the moed, at least you should be worried. You should admit the shem yivka noid amalei lishkevaka, and you should at least be concerned that's going to break. And retroactively, it's going to be that he ate tevel, he ate wine without taking off truma. And that Rameir said this is his opinion. Is that when it takes place, it takes place. So you see from here, Rameir across Shas is not worried about death. We see that Rameir holds that we're we see that he said right, because Rameir is worried about death, but when it comes to the barrel, that at least we could you could hide. So when and according to Rabbi Yehuda really doesn't really worry about death. In the case of the wine, was a technical problem of breira. They won't be able to latch on. That was our answer to the contradiction between the two. And then we asked, but Rabbi Yehuda spoke to Rameir, and he said, "Don't you agree that it might break?" So it looks like Rabbi Yehuda is worried about breaking, not the issue of latching on to his words. On that he said, Rameir answers that no, I'm not worried about it. You could protect it, and when it breaks, it breaks. But Rameir still worries about death and halach. We're going to end there.